Good morning, everyone. Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 18, coming to the climactic battle between Israel's God and the god Baal of the Canaanites. This is probably one of the most popular stories that I would suggest that most people will recognize the battle of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. The interesting thing about it is why it's there and the battle that's going on. We normally, I think, don't see some of the meaning or the mystery that's sort of around the event, because we're not used to knowing what Baal is and what the god of the storm and the rain and the god of the fire, the lightning bolt. That's Baal, and he is the superior god of the Canaanites. And Jezebel has been able, at least it's become a state religion, among the Israelites. But they're still, they're kind of wavering, as people tend to do before they completely go into apostasy. There's some doubt and wavering, playing with that, or participating in that, which we shouldn't be doing anyway. But that's what North Israel is, involved in. And so it's a critical time in history of Israel. And I think, as I mentioned before, this is one of the reasons why we have the Elijah and Elisha narratives, because it's a period of pause for there to be a turning point. And we almost see a turning point per se, but it doesn't stick. Even with Ahab, we'll see in the end that he comes to recognize that, God's the only God. But then again, what does that mean if it's not embraced, or if it's not, practiced in your own life? What does it mean to say that you believe in a certain God? So the depth of their belief or their faith after seeing and witnessing the miracle that happens on Mount Carmel is impressive, but it doesn't seem to be impressive enough to keep Israel faithful. Now, that's something for us to consider, because there are people, and sometimes we might think this way, that if he'd just show me a sign, he'd just do some kind of miracle. If there was something, a voice, give me a feeling, give me some kind of sign, then I'd believe. And every time that's done for Israel, and even Jesus doing it, it didn't end up that people believed on a mass scale. Some did. But we have to remember that the reasons for these miracles, and the reason that God opened the window of miracles at certain periods of time, is to emphasize that he's the only authentic one. The miracles are to lead people to recognize, that God is who he claims to be. And so these signs, or these miracles and these wonders that are done, are meant to confirm and establish, what people should already know. And that's also how the miracles and the signs and the wonders are described in the New Testament, when Jesus and later the apostles and people in the church who had miraculous gifts, they were meant to provide, testimony, to authenticate that their word is confirmed by, the signs that are being done. But as we know from the story about Lazarus and the rich man who lifted up his eyes in Hades and was being tormented, and he asked for comfort, and no comfort was granted to him. And then he turned his mind to his family that was still alive, people that he knew, and he says, send someone from the dead. Well, think about this for a minute. Hasn't Jesus already at times in his ministry raised some people from the dead? He's done that, hasn't he? Well, the first thing we think, we'll send someone from the dead and warn my brothers so they will not come to this place of torment where I'm presently, in a flame. And Jesus, or at least Abraham, said, They have law, they have Moses and the law, and, sending someone from the dead is not going to convince them. And why is that? What's the real issue as to the reason why it would not be convincing? It's the heart situation, isn't it? They're close to it anyway. And so if your heart is hardened to the Word of God and to what God has revealed and, in Moses and the prophets and His law, if your heart is already rebellious against that, then what makes you think that any, miracle is going to change that condition of the heart? So ultimately, it's a heart issue. And when we use the heart in the Bible, when you think about it, it's the seat of reason, the seat and the foundation of our mind's commitment and grasping it. We use the idea of a heart to represent what? Write you a little letter and I put a heart on there. What does that mean? Love or feeling, emotion, right? It's passion, feeling, I love you. But the Jews would say, I feel it in my gut. And we use that sometimes. See, they're on a lower level than we are. The heart to the Jew was the reason, and the gut, the bowels, is where they felt things. Now, in our translations, a lot of times, in some older translations, you might have the idea of bowels being used to demonstrate emotions, but I think most of the modern translations will talk about the heart, because that's how we understand as English people the seat of emotion, right? And we use mind to represent. Now, that doesn't mean it's always so dry cut, because the Bible does say mind also, but the gut represented where a person felt, they feel it. It's like we have a gut feeling about something, it's a feeling, So that's the idea. It's not that it's much different, but I think we need to be aware of those kinds of things, because people can be confused, and you might think that Christianity is just all emotion. It's how you feel, but it's not. Uh-huh. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the Jews would more likely, the heart was the seat of reason and the mind and thinking, and the gut was the gut was the emotion. We usually think of the mind as the seat of reason and the heart as the seat of emotion. But, it's not always clear cut, as I said, in New Testament, because sometimes the word mind is used. In some kinds, like Paul in Romans chapter 12, transforming of our minds. So there are times when it's emphasized, the rational thinking, the changing of the mind. But the mind can represent, in the New Testament, all of it. The rational and the emotion, the whole person, the whole being. So it's always it's not only rejection on the part of the Israelites, their logic or their rationale is dumbfounding. Look at all that their history has shown them. Why would they then desire and seek other gods or religious things? You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't make sense. That's why the prophets will come along and they ridicule the people, because they make idols that they bow down to, and they're the maker of the idol. And so the prophets will just, they're very sarcastic, particularly Isaiah and Jeremiah. You make an idol and the weather comes and starts to teeter around, and you run over there and you hold it up, and then, something will happen, it'll fall down, you got to get it and raise it back up and, hammer it down on the foundation, and that's your God. So it's a point of sarcasm in the prophets, and this represents a climactic event in demonstrating that God is the one true God. The climactic event that is remembered throughout the history of God's people, of course, is the battle between God and the gods of Egypt. So the Exodus represents God, delivering his people. It's just like our speaker said on Wednesday night, if you heard him about, the domain of darkness. That word domain is the rule. You're captured. And so you have this battle where Israel is in a state of being captured and ruled over by Egypt. And yet what does God do? He delivers them. He causes their release. He brings them out. And that becomes somewhat of a symbol of not only leaving this earth for eternity, our exodus, but also our exodus from sin into Jesus Christ. That's a major theme in the New Testament. So Elijah has encountered Ahab, at least we know 2 times. The first time he said there's going to be a drought, and right there sets the stage for the battle between Baal and Yahweh or God of Israel. And then Elijah's gone. God takes care of him. We have some, side events that happen. A widow is taken care of. A widow's son is raised. All of these things occur. And then Ahab is, Elijah is going to see Ahab again, and we have that encounter of Obadiah, okay? And I wanted to ask you, one of the best question you can ask from a text is saying, why is this event recorded? Why is the event of Obadiah recorded? Is it just an embellishment or something to make the story interesting? Why was this recorded? You know what Obadiah did? He works in the king's court. He also hid what? In caves. Remember? Jezebel was killing all the prophets of God, and we were introduced to the schools of prophets. There's evidently a training program for individuals to become prophets, preachers for God. And he hid 100 of them, separated them by 50s in a cave and fed them for a period of time. We don't know how long, but it was quite quite a feat for him to achieve under the oversight of the evil Jezebel, who wanted to kill all the prophets of God. And so we have Obadiah that encounters Elijah, and Elijah tells Obadiah to go to Ahab and tell him where I am. And of course, Obadiah is somewhat reluctant. Why? You remember? Why is Obadiah? He was afraid to be killed. Yeah, because evidently Elijah has the reputation of popping in and popping out. I don't know how to take that, but God sent him, to take care of him, and Ahab has been looking for him for a period of time and can't find him. And then all of a sudden, he appears before Obadiah, and Obadiah says, look, you need to stay here and don't leave if I'm going to tell Ahab where you are, because if he comes here and you've popped away again, he'll kill me. Okay. And you remember Elijah's response? Don't worry, I'll be here. He has to trust him that he's going to be there with the reputation of popping in and out, okay? So we have this the situation with Obadiah, but the question remains, why is Obadiah and the episode about him given to us? Why do we have that?
I find it ironic that he was
Might be, yeah. Because the Asherah priestesses ate at the table and were part of the household of Jezebel. Let me ask it this way. Obadiah represents a stark contrast to who in the narrative? Who is he set in contrast to, do you think? Who's the main character of this episode, the main opponent of Elijah? It's Ahab, isn't it? I suspect that Obadiah might be representing the contrast of Ahab. Because who does Obadiah represent? The right way. Even in the midst of being under the threat of Jezebel, Obadiah has represented what qualities? He's been sensitive to God's will, to God's prophets. He's also has taken what that could hurt himself, risks for God. He did not stop serving God. And that's a stark contrast to the king, Ahab. Is it not? I mean, if we put these two together, who's doing the will of God? Who's representing God's mind, God's purpose, God's plans? Well, it's Obadiah. It's not Ahab, which is interesting because the king was to be a representative of God to the people, to facilitate the keeping of his will, his commandments. He was to be an exemplar of what it meant to be a servant of God. And Ahab is as weak as anybody you would ever see. Jezebel is conniving and deceitful and very, very evil in what she does. Not only in her relationship with Ahab, but what she has done to the prophets and what she seeks to do to Elijah after this great contest. So we have Ahab and Elijah meet, and the first thing out of Ahab's mouth to Elijah is what when they see each other again? What does he say? You remember? Famous statement. You troubler of Israel. See, from Ahab's point of view, it seems because of the actions of Elijah, okay, Baal has somehow left and is not overseeing the comforts and the prosperity of the people anymore. You know, it's Elijah's problem. He's offended Baal. But Elijah turned it around and said, no, it's not me, it's you. You're the troubler of Israel. You're the one that has brought this upon yourself because it is God who is punishing you. So let's look at, chapter 18, verse 17. And Ahab sought Elijah. Ahab said to him, it is you, you trouble of Israel. And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have in your father's house. You remember all the kings, up until this point before Ahab have been increasingly getting worse, more sinful, and then, Ahab represents the climax of the sinfulness. He says, you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. All right? See, you should have been like Obadiah. Obadiah is representing the situation in which a person is living in a corrupt society but is faithful to God. He says, you have followed the Baals. Now therefore, send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of the Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So we got 850 prophets. Now, an interesting thing is when the challenge is recorded, we don't have represented in the scene the prophets of the Asherah. It may be that, I don't know, the reason Jezebel may have withheld him, said, no, we're not going to do that. But the 450 prophets of Baal show up at this contest. So let's begin verse 20. So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you go? And what does your translation have? Hesitate, falter, waver. What? Ought. Okay, halt. All right. The word means to be limp. I noticed that. I was surprised to see in this New English translation, the English Standard Translation, that they have, how long will you limp? And it's connected to the idea of someone who actually has a limp, for whatever reason. It could be from, injury, some kind of thing that happened or something from birth. But it's going to be a wordplay that's used later as the prophets of Baal limp around their sacrifice, trying to call on the power of Baal to come and, bring fire to gobble up that sacrifice of theirs. But that's going to be you don't see it in English, except here I find it interesting that this English Standard Translation uses the word limp in both situations, so you catch the wordplay, okay? But they're wavering. It means, to limp, to waver, and you haven't quite made a decision, and you're trying to hold on to both. This is what happens to a lot of people who might contemplate becoming a Christian, and they just, it's hard to release familiarity to go to the unfamiliar. And that's what Christianity is doing, is transforming our life. When we turn from something, we're turning to something else. And to repent is to turn from. And this has been the challenge of Israel. They know their history. They're part of their history. They know what their parents went through and all this, and so they don't want to totally, give up Yahweh, but they really like this Baal worship for whatever reason. And it's probably because it's sensual, it's all emotional, it has all kinds of cool things. It's the same kind of thing that goes on today. Do what? It's tangible. Yes, tangible. Relics. You have people who seemingly are doing some spiritual things, and it's no different than our culture today and how spirituality is defined, not according to the Bible, but how people feel and what people want and think they want. But it's just so challenging to them to actually give up on something that's been a part of their history for a long time. But we've had this situation occur on numerous occasions. Joshua, choose you this day. What? Whom you will serve. What did Jesus say in Matthew chapter 6? You can't serve God and mammon. So there's always a choice to it. Christianity is a choice to leave one thing to turn to something else. So how long will you be limping or wavering between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. So it looks, we have the 450 prophets of Baal, but we also have Israel, okay? And I don't know how many are representative. There must be a lot of people that have gathered to witness this event, because later on, Elijah will tell Israel, come closer before he calls on God to intervene in the sacrifice. James also talks about, came to my mind, the double-minded man, unstable. See the limping, the unstable in all his ways, the wavering, the limping. Then Elijah said to the people, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Okay. For some reason, we don't see any reference here to the Asherah, but we have the Baal prophets, 450 men. Now, we know there's more prophets than what Elijah says, okay? Because Obadiah has spared the lives of prophets under the dictate of Jezebel to go kill them, right? So what does he mean in this context, that I alone am the prophet of Yahweh of God? Yeah. In this context, I think it's a representative that he is one against the 450. Okay? So, let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves and cut it to pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire on it. And I will prepare other bull and lay it on the wood and put no fire on it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people answered, it is well spoken. They agreed to the plan. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many, and call upon the name of your God and put no fire on it. And so they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice and no answer. I think that would be a good thing to underline. No voice, no answer. Boy, that'd make a good sermon. Going to things where there is no voice and no answer. So, tell me something about the courtesy of Elijah here. What is he? Yeah, he lets them go first. You choose your bull. Hey, you accepted the contract, but I'm not going to give you what you need to do. You do what you do. You get your sacrifice, but the only stipulation is that we're not going to burn it. Okay? And they agreed to that because who is Baal? The god of the storm, the god of the fire, the god who rides the lightning bolt. So that was agreeable to them. So they prepare this sacrifice on this altar, and they are involved in calling unto their God, and they did it from morning to midday. Okay, so they've been going at it for a while, and then Elijah steps in. This is the greatest. I think it's perfectly fine. There's a place for sarcasm. And I think he's being sarcastic here. He's prodding them along because they're believing in fiction. They're believing in things that aren't true, that everybody should know. And so at noon, Elijah mocked, saying, cry louder, for he is a god. Either he is in deep thought or musing. Mine says musing. What do you have? He's occupied. The word there means, he's contemplating, he's in deep thinking. Baal's busy. He's in his library or whatever, okay. Then it says, or he is, what do you have next? Okay. Grown silent?
Gone inside.
Okay. Gone inside? Yeah. This means perhaps he's relieving himself. Translator sometimes, I guess they don't want.
They want to tone it down.
They want to tone it down a little bit. Hebrew is very graphic.
Yeah.
He's in the outhouse.
Yeah.
He's occupied. He's busy. He's relieving himself.
Yeah.
Now he's getting under the goad of these prophets and mocking them. Or he's on a journey. Or perhaps he is asleep and he needs to be awakened. So those are the situations that could possibly be why Baal hasn't answered your prayers yet. Where is he, guys? So in response to that, they become even more fanatical. And so we read, and they cried aloud, and they've started to cut themselves after their custom. It's interesting to me that a lot of, in paganism and these ancient religions and things of this nature, the idea of cutting, the idea of bloodletting and things like this is prominent. But this was a custom of the priests and the prophets of Baal. So they cut with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on. What does your translation say? That says rave. They raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. This is about 3:00 p.m. But there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. Again, notice this is the punchline. No one answered, no one paid them attention. There's no voice. Okay? So I will have to say, though, the prophets of Baal seem to be true believers in Baal. These are the prophets of Baal. By their antics. I mean, the unfortunate thing, one can be a true believer in a false religion. Right? Absolutely. We don't need to forget that. They're sincere and true people in false religion who are committed. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, we have the next phase that happens. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." He wants everybody to come near. He's going to give a little lesson and truth. And all the people came near to him. And I'm thinking it's not only the prophets of Baal, but it's the representatives of Israel, whoever is there of Israel. Okay? Now, you might recall, this is theological, I think, in intent. James uses the phrase, draw near to God, and he'll what? Draw near to you. Now, they're about to see something that's authentic and real, not fake. And he said, all the people came near to him, and he prepared the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Talk to me about that. What does that say about Israel? The altar of God was in shambles. What does that represent? Yeah, it represents their attitude toward God. So he rebuilt it. Restoration. He rebuilt it. Elijah took 12 stones, which represent who? Israel, 12 tribes of Israel. Now, we're in North Israel, but it's including the 12 tribes. He's on a path of restoration. He wants them to see what God's original intent is. According to the number of tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar as great as would contain two, what do y'all have? 2 measures. Seos of seed, which is, I have here, 7 quarts, a measurement. And he put the wood in order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, now that was all that was required. But what is Elijah doing? It's going to be, this is no tricks. He's going overboard when he starts requesting them to pour water over everything. If you know, and it's so interesting that Baal is what? The god of the storm. And so he wants to pour water all over the sacrifice that's made to God. You have to appreciate that a little bit. He says, and put the wood in order, fill the jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar, filled the trench also with water. In this episode about Elijah, this account, numbers seem to stand out significantly. 12, 3, and we'll find out that the drought lasted 3.5 years, which, if we remember listening to David during his presentation of Revelation, it represents a period of tribulation. It's used in Revelation 3.5 years, but it's limited. You'll also see some other numbers that come up. So they did it the third time. And at that time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Notice it seems to be, we usually have Abraham, Isaac, and who? Jacob. Seems intentional here because they're divided, you see. Let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, not be impressed with me, but they may know that you are Lord, our God, and that you have turned their heads back. That's what God wants to do. He wants to bring them what? He wants to bring them back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. Now, I see, what would be the fire of heaven that came down, do you think? You know, it would make sense to me what it was. Now, if you talk to our brother Hester here, he's been struck by lightning. How many times? He's been struck by lightning about one time. That's why his hair grows so good, thick. Okay?
I've got it ringing in my ears all the time.
So, you know, this fire is probably a lightning bolt that came down and just consumed everything. And it might also be, you know, maybe it's fire as we were thinking, but a lightning bolt is considered, you know, the idea of fire as well. And being in contrast to the storm god, you know, it's really striking. So God has shown himself to be the only true God over the fake gods that people get caught up in. Think about all the waste of time of these prophets of Israel. Think of the waste of time of participating in false religion. What a waste. And all along you thought you were doing something beneficial, but you weren't, because it's false religion. Man, that's an eye-opener. That's an eye-opener. And so God, sent fire from heaven and drank up and consumed the sacrifice. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." And Elijah said to them, this must be the Israelites, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Let no one of them escape, and seize them." And Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. This has been used sometimes to criticize God's action, but this is what the law demanded. It demanded false prophets to be stoned, and there were so many here that they were slaughtered by a brook that would wash the blood all the way out of Israel. That's a heavy price. You think about the New Testament as warning against false prophets. False prophets are not to be admired, to be shunned. I don't care if they are charismatic, well-spoken, highly degreed, likable. Maybe these prophets of Baal were like that too, in the Asherah. I would assume that they dressed, in, garb that represented something divine. And yet they were all destroyed. So, and the time of the offering of oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, "O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel." Which is interesting. Now, let's go back to the verse 41. And Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of the rushing of rain." So there's a thunderous noise that's occurring. And Israel seemed to have repented, or they have confirmed their belief in God. So Ahab went up to eat and drink, and Elijah went up to the top of the Mount Carmel, and he bowed himself down to the earth and put his face between his knees. And he said to the servant, "Go now, look toward the sea." And he went up, and indeed, and said, "There's nothing." And he said, "Go again 7 times, another number. And at the 7th time, he said, "Behold, a little cloud like a man's hand is rising from the sea." And he said, "Go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you." So Ahab is warned to go, get his chariot, and head to Jezreel, where, Jezebel is and all this. And in a little while, the heavens grew black and clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel, and the hand of the Lord was on Elijah. And he gathered up his garments and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel, 17 miles. And he beat Ahab, who's in a chariot. I want to say, well, it was muddy and the chariot got stuck and stuff like that, but it's just probably another instance of God providing Elijah a certain amount of speed to run on foot and beat the chariot to Jezreel. So everything is going well. The success is great. Elijah has had his moment with God. And then we'll have another thing where Jezebel is not too happy about what has happened. Thank you. That's all.